Next up, we have the wonderful Lauren Moss, who's going to guide us in a conversation about how to get your music on music in TV and film. So in this conversation, we'll discuss the myriad of roles that a music supervisor plays in a project. This can include everything from working with a composer to pitching songs to managing a budget to negotiating deals. The list really does go on. So now we're going to ask ourselves, should music publishing be a part of our outreach strategy? It's an area that our field has not paid as much attention to, but we're lucky to have this group of experts with us to show us how to break into this arena. We'll discuss what music supervisors are looking for, the ins and outs of music publishing, and get tips on how to get your material in front of the right ears and into TV shows and films. A little bit about our moderator, Lauren. Lauren grew up in Virginia, and she is a multi-instrumentalist playing woodwinds, brass, guitar, and whatever else she can get her hands on. She went to Berklee College of Music, and she also managed St. Vincent while working at the seminal punk record label Kill Rock Stars in Olympia, Washington, and then moved over to New York. In 2009, she migrated to Terrorbird Media, where she was establishing their sync licensing department and co-founding Terrorbird Publishing. As Terrorbird's director of operations, she's passionate about utilizing her sync and publishing experience to empower her coworkers and drive opportunities for clients. So please welcome Lauren Ross and our fellow panelists. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks for the intro, Mira. Hi, I'm Lauren, and I would like to start by giving a shout out to the panel that immediately preceded this. That was so inspiring and exciting. And it's clear that y'all are on a mission to change the world. And I want to let you know that you have already changed the way that I plan to approach this panel. So great job making an immediate impact. So yes, hello. So this panel is meant to cover really a wide stretch of information. And so we're gonna do our best to teach you about these really large topics actually, which are music licensing and publishing and music supervision. We're gonna talk about what music publishing and music supervision are, and then ultimately how those come together and where do you, many of you being artists, fit in. There, I believe, should be a poll going out so that we can get a sense from y'all of what your primary role is within the music industry. So we know better, like, are we talking to primarily musicians, promoters, etc. So please fill that out when you get a chance so that we know who we're talking to. And in the meantime, let me get you hyped on who y'all are hearing from. So we have an amazing panel right here that all have decades of experience in sync licensing and in music publishing. There's even some Grammy and Emmy nominated folks in here, and I'm going to invite each of them to briefly introduce themselves so that y'all know the context for where they fit in within this picture. And what I'm gonna ask my panelists to do is to please go in alphabetical order. So can you go Barry? Who are you? Blake, who are you? Carter, Kerri, and then Seigo. Hit it.
I'm Barry. I'm just a guy that likes music. Somewhere along the line, I started to like film as well, and I never really thought I could put the two together. So I studied film in college. I got a job working for Spike Lee just out of school, but it was an internship. So to make money, I had to fall back on what I had done basically as a hobby and to make money through college, which was DJing. So for me, there was always a music link to my film life, but unfortunately they occupied different parts of my schedule. So I embraced the job of music supervisor some 20 years ago, and it's been an amazing ride working in every different kind of music, every different kind of film. But my calling has always been to pay artists for their art so that they can make more art. That's me.
All right, Blake, you're next in the alphabet.
Hello, I'm Blake. I've been working in film and music and sound for a long time. I started when I was very young. I got an independent major degree from UC Santa Cruz in 1983 in film and electronic music. And I moved to LA and I started working as a sound designer at a time when the technology was changing. And that gave me an opportunity to work on a lot of different films. So I worked as a sound designer for quite a few years and then got back into doing music, which was my first love. Worked as a composer in the 90s in Los Angeles. And then in 1997, I moved to New York and was combining sound work and music. And I wound up working on being asked to be the sound designer on a project that really didn't sound very interesting, which was a Baltimore cop show. And I was like, a cop show? I'd worked on TJ Hooker a number of years before. I wasn't really up for doing another TV cop show, but I had no other job. So I met with them and okay. And even when we started working on it, I was like, I wasn't really feeling it. And then they asked me to help with picking the music, and that made the job a bit more interesting. And then the series was The Wire, and I also wrote the theme music that plays over the end credits. So I was kind of the sound designer, composer, music supervisor for the for the pilot, and then for the first season. But it really wasn't until the third season of that show that anybody cared about it. Hardly anyone watched it when it was on, so it wasn't like this grand success at all. So I kind of fell into music supervising. But the great thing about that project as well was that the last couple of seasons I got involved with working with the music community in Baltimore, which was kind of a revelation to be able to use music supervising as proactive social engagement and supporting a music community. So felt like I was taking HBO's money and giving it to kids in Baltimore who were making hip hop, and that was incredibly gratifying. Went on from that to do David Simon's next series, which was Treme, which was a similar thing. Several years in New Orleans of really being very engaged with the New Orleans music community, helping them get back on their feet after Hurricane Katrina. And so that was work that really felt like it had a sense of purpose and meaning. It wasn't just, oh, we're gonna pick some tunes and put them in a TV show. So those kind of projects don't come along very often. I've done all of David Simon's projects as a music supervisor.
Blake, I'm going to lovingly pause you there because you're spoiling some of my questions for you.
Okay. Okay,
So
anyway, I go back and forth. I do music supervising, but I also do work as a sound designer and as a composer on documentaries mostly, and do all of that. So sorry, I rambled on for a long time. Good thing you stopped me. Let's hear from someone else.
Hi, thanks, Blake. Hi, I'm Carter Armstrong. I am Senior Vice President of Film and TV for peermusic Publishing, the largest independent music publisher on the face of this earth. And before that, I ran the music department at Lionsgate Pictures, so Hunger Games, La La Land, and then before that, I was a music executive at Warner Brothers Pictures for 14 years. So Contagion, Hangover, Argo, all kinds of stuff like that, including some really not so great movies too. It's been nice to hear everybody's story. I'll just quickly tie myself in. While Barry and Blake are happy to help artists get paid for their art, that's what we do as a publisher. Is we try to get from the other side. We're trying to get the artist. We're working with the artist to get them paid. While Barry and Blake, and then what I used to do is to make a great movie or a TV show or a video game, and then also sprinkle a little pixie dust for the artist. So there it is.
Kerri, you're up.
Hi, I'm Kerri. I've been in the business for about 20 years. I'm currently, for the past almost 20 years, I've been an in-house music supervisor at NBC Universal Television. I tend to work on a lot of the big comedies. That's just kind of the path I went down and the path that just suits me the best, because I grew up just watching comedies and MTV. So this all makes a lot of sense to me. I've done The Office, Parks and Rec, Master of None, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Currently have Rutherford Falls coming out soon, the Punky Brewster reboot, and God, there's a lot. There's been a lot of shows over the years, some memorable, some not, and there's a lot more coming up, and things are really gearing up right now. So it's awesome to be here.
Awesome, thanks, Kerri. Seigo, how about you?
Hi, I'm Seigo. I've been in the music publishing industry for probably 20 some years. I can't even remember, but a long time. And you know, at Pro, you may be like all like that. I in love with the music. I started like being musicians, and you know, ended up being to the music publishing business for last 20 years. Currently, I'm at Domino Publishing. I used to work in Leyh music publishing and BMG a little bit, and I've been doing a lot of licensing and publishing business in general. So I guess, you know, I'm on the other side. You know, I've been working with you guys for many years, so nice to see you guys.
Awesome, thanks, Seigo. Gosh, y'all have already covered some of the things that I actually really wanted to talk to you about. So that's going to shift the way that we maneuver through this. So that's very exciting. Let's go improv style. Seigo, since you were actually just talking about some of the details of what you do with publishing, could you explain further to people? Because I think that a lot of people in this audience don't have a strong familiarity with what music publishing really is and what it covers, perhaps in addition to, and Carter, we'll go to you about what it covers in relation to sync stuff, that side of publishing. Seigo, could you speak first for a minute of like, what are the non-sync licensing aspects that are involved in publishing?
Sure. So the music publishing in general, just we deal with the copyright. So the rights for the compositions. And as a publisher, sometimes, you know, you control the master recording as well. So main three areas, like, you know, we have the income through the performance income, which is like radio, TV performance, to concerts venue, to, you know, bars and all that stuff. We'll get the royalty for the performance income, mostly through the PROs. And the second area is
the PROs are ASCAP and BMI and CSAC.
Right, in the US, and then PRS in the UK, and, you know, jazz like in Japan and whatsoever. And the second area was the mechanical rights, which is more, you know, used to be the main source of income for audio sales, CDs and records and vinyls and digital downloads. Now it's switching over to streaming services, which, you know, we get the publishing royalty for those in venues. And
so it sounds like you're covering a lot of different royalty streams that come in for the songwriters' works, right. And none of the things that you've mentioned so far are about the placements in film or TV. So it sounds like a publisher covers quite a bit beyond that. And Carter, you're heading up specifically the sync licensing side of things at a publishing company. Can you tell us more about what that means?
Yeah, so the sync,
sure. So
that's what I'm getting into sync.
Oh, my bad.
Sorry, Carter, go
please, go right ahead.
I can mute.
Okay, I'll take it. So yes, of course, there are three main revenue streams that a publisher is managing. And Seigo, you covered the first two. The third is, of course, sync. Sync stands for synchronization, when you're putting music to a picture, when you're synchronizing it with a picture. So that picture could be a film, it could be a television show, it could be a video game, and now it can also be podcasts. And that's what I do. So I'm what a publisher in my situation is doing is taking the music from our catalog and trying to proactively find places where it can be exploited. And I mean that in the most generous and loving of terms. You know, we want the music of an artist to be exploited. That means that they are getting paid. So what we try to do is find spots, and then we answer briefs from from lovely people like Barry or Kerri, trying to help them make people laugh and tell stories and make people cry and all of that kind of good stuff.
Awesome. So maybe we can transition that then into saying, Barry and Kerri, what is it that can you tell us more about the music supervision process? Let's maybe start with Barry in terms of when you've got a project and you're figuring out where's the music going to go and what kind of music is going to fit into each scene. Can you tell us more about how you go through that?
Sure. The thing I love about every project is every project's completely different. So it's a great chance to just clean the slate, clean the palette, and then just start fresh. For me, I used to just focus on music supervision. Then I realized, just as you were saying, Lauren, there's so many aspects to the job that I had to get my head around what was of importance and what went where. And that was when I started to divide my duties between strategy, supervision, and clearance. You know, every film doesn't need supervision, but every film usually needs clearance. And what that is saying is that sometimes they don't necessarily need musical direction, but they do need help navigating the waters of music clearance, which, you know, they're not necessarily unrough waters sometimes. So for me, at the beginning of a project, you know, the first thing to ascertain is there music that's going to actually be playing in production or on screen? Is music a character in the film in some way? And that conversation comes up so that we can budget for it. Once we get to an idea of how many songs we have in a film, a feature film, or how many songs we have per episode of an episodic series, then looking at the budget, you know, it's very easy to do simple math. It's like you have $60,000 and you want 5 songs. Well, it looks like $12,000 a song. It's a great ballpark, and some places will need more money than others, but it always starts the conversation in the right place. So we're not necessarily always trying to grasp for a song that's out of our budgetary reach. Once the film is shot, and usually at a rough cut stage, we'll do what's called a spotting session. And that spotting session will be a session where the editor, myself, the director, the producer, and the composer, if they're on board already, will go through the project scene by scene and talk about the music in each scene. Does the scene need music? What kind of music does it need? Is it source music or is it score? Source music being music that we will actually license. And that, for me as a music supervisor, sets the stage for the entire rest of the project, because that gives us a spreadsheet. Those spotting notes don't change. Those are very, very tangible. So being able to go line by line, scene by scene, and develop what I like to do is a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C for each scene that will allow for budget as well as schedule. That usually will help guide us into delivery on budget and on schedule, which at the end of the day, the job of a music supervisor, you know, can be creative, but really the responsibility of it is to assure that the music side, score and songs are delivered on budget and on schedule, so it doesn't hold up the distribution of the film or project.
I want to just transcribe that and call it a book about music supervision. That was so helpful and so perfect, I think, for a lot of the people in the audience. Kerri, being in-house at NBC, is there anything about Barry's process that is dissimilar from yours?
A lot of it's really the same. So thank you for laying it out so beautifully. Every project, I was going to say the same thing, is very different. Sometimes, you know, I'm in from the beginning with the producers talking about the sound of the show, working it out. Ideally, that's the best way to go. Sometimes you just jump right in and just start fielding their requests. At least I do. Because working in-house, I tend to have volume. I'm working on a lot of shows at a time. So a lot of times I'm just taking it as it comes, figuring out, you know, the tone of the show. But luckily, a lot of my producers I work with over and over again. So I kind of know their tastes. You know, I started on Office, which led to Parks, which leads to Brooklyn. So it's like, I keep going with them and I kind of get their vibe by now. So yeah, a lot of it's the same. Some shows I find being part of the spotting session is super helpful, especially some music intensive shows when I work on dramas. A lot of times I find them not as necessary for some of the comedies because they tend to be lighter and it tends to be a time suck and I'll just get the notes later and deal with it. Honestly, just straight shooting here. Some shows I do it, some shows I don't. So yeah, every production's different. Some producers have, you know, really know what they want, and on some shows they really don't, and you have more creative range.
I'm curious. So I'm having flashbacks to Parks and Rec, and you had some on-camera band situations there, whether from Mouse Rat or I think Decemberists were like at the end, or Was it that?
Right.
So I'm curious, have you dealt, now that we're in COVID land, have you dealt with any on-camera situations in this past year? And what has that been like for anyone who's experienced that?
Yeah, it's different. You know, I haven't been on set or anything. I actually almost was gonna be a drummer on set on Punky, but it was super, and I really wanted to do it. It's like my dream. They asked me to, and then I'm just like, I just found out I'd have to be stuck in this room, and it was super like COVID heavy times, and it was the presidential election day, and I'm like, I'm gonna sit this one out. But anyway, with the COVID stuff, it's adding a lot of layers to it. With, you know, I had to get it on camera for Punky done, and I was just trying to set it up, and then my boss was like, hold on, there's all these new rules with COVID, and we have to go way through the proper channels. So there's, you know, testing and a lot of regulations, even down to when we had somebody doing a pre-record for the show in their own home studio, there had to be protocols that were followed and assured due to COVID. So I didn't even know, like, okay, even if I have this guy that I know recording a song in his home studio, there's still all these new rules that we have to make sure are buttoned up and safe.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot, and your job was already a lot.
Yeah.
And so Barry had mentioned something about budgetary stuff, and I wonder how budgetary things impact the music that you end up being able to use. And I'm specifically kind of inspired by, you know, Blake, some of the projects that you were talking about working on. Barry, I know many of the projects that you've worked on. And something that I think is very important to most of the people attending this conference is musical authenticity. You know, people want to be placing, you know, real bands. They want to be placing music that's of the era in which the film takes place, or that's from the place. I mean, obviously Blake with Treme, I mean, that was pivotal. I mean, for those who aren't familiar, Treme took place in New Orleans directly after Hurricane Katrina, and its plot largely centers around musicians. So it was critical that show take authenticity really seriously. And, you know, that because that was so critical to the film, to the show, like for a project like that, Blake, or for some of your musical projects, like musical documentaries and biopics that you've been involved in, Barry, how is your responsibility to that authenticity perhaps sometimes countered by budgetary restrictions? Where do you meet in the middle with some of that?
I have a quick funny story. Working on Notorious, which was the Biggie Smalls documentary, you know, the priority was to have Biggie's music wherever we needed it, scripted and otherwise. So I can honestly say that 85–90% of the budget went to acquire those rights. That's all there was to it. So that left in post-production an entire world of a 22-year-old life to fill in with music, and not much money to do so. So, you know, that's a situation where, you know, you hope that, wow, this film, it's about one of the, you know, greatest artists that lived. How can we do tribute? How can we make the music authentic? And, you know, no music supervisor likes to feel like they only have to rely on library tracks. But sometimes that's all your budget is going to allow for. And I remember there's a certain scene where young Christopher Wallace leaves his house and goes up to the roof, changes out of the clothes that he would wear for his mom, and puts on his gold chain, his sneakers, and he walks across this rooftop, and there's this beat playing. And it was the library beat, and it was just flat. But for me, what I wanted to do to add authenticity to it was I called Rob Swift, who is a DJ from a group called The Executioners, and said, Rob, what can you do with 2 turntables in this beat? And it was amazing just giving him that inspiration and the scene and watching him go to town to do a live re-edit from 2 turntables of this library beat. And that scene ended up, you know, coming to life a lot more than it would have if, you know, we basically just had to rely on what was available. So that's a situation where the creativity definitely won out for us.
Well, I can say a couple of things, which is that authenticity doesn't have to be more expensive. And you know, there have been many times in my work where it was in fact much more efficient and cheaper You know, specifically on The Wire, the first few seasons, one of the reasons I look back on the first season of The Wire, and the music supervision is terrible, actually. It's not music that was really playing in that community, specifically the hip hop, you know, because I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, what hip hop can we clear? It's so difficult to clear hip hop because there's always multiple artists, multiple producers, samples, all of these issues, you know. And then once we did sort of start working a little bit with some labels, you know, that music was always very expensive. So by going and say to people in the community and saying, well, what are you actually listening to? And then we hooked up with artists like Leyh and DJ Techno and people who were doing Baltimore Club and were there, and they were thrilled to give us tracks for a fraction of what you would pay for a major label hip hop hit. And that music, so I mean, so you're kind of winning. It's a win-win-win-win situation. You know, you're supporting the community, you're giving young artists exposure, and it's cheaper. You know, so HBO would have a problem. Always had a problem with that. Not always, but at first, particularly, they were like, "You're going to give our money to a bunch of thugs in Baltimore," you know, and we're like, "Well, yes, we are." You know, and there were times where in order to sign a contract, someone had to go to the jail and find someone and get them signed. But, you know, then you end up in a situation where you have real music and it's great, you know. And similarly in New Orleans on Treme, I mean, you will pay $40,000 to use a song that everyone recognizes and knows, and New Orleans hit, you know. You can get a current artist who's working in New Orleans who's trying to rebuild their house after the storm, and they can give you their original composition and come play it for you, and you can record it and get all of that for, again, a lot less than $40,000. And so what I was always doing was advocating for the musicians, saying, hey, we should pay. I mean, we did, in fact, in New Orleans, we kind of, part of the way we got that done was by saying we were going to pay everyone the same. And so $10,000 was a very common fee that we would pay, and we would pay that to a young starting out artist or a known artist in New Orleans if we used their composition and master. Again, so authenticity doesn't have to be expensive or difficult. It can actually be efficient. In New Orleans, we had to sometimes have 40 pieces of music in a 1-hour TV show, 10 of which were recorded live. And having the artists show up to set and play their own compositions and do all the paperwork there was actually an efficient and cheap way of doing it. So you just have to think out of the box, you know, and not just always assume, well, we have to arrange a way for Time Warner to pay Sony. You know, there are other ways of doing this work that are closer to the ground and work well for everyone.
And something that you mentioned too, I love the kind of democratization of and equality in that even financial split of like everyone's being paid the same. And so just side note tip for people who don't know this, there's a term in the music licensing world called MFN. It's the letters MFN. Well, I don't know why I did that. MFN. And that stands for Most Favored Nations. And if you're ever approached about having your music in something like, let's say maybe you control just the master side or just the publishing side of something and you're signing off on that, when you sign off on that, you're going to want to say, you know, X number of dollars, MFN with publishing or master or whatever the other side is, or whoever the other publishers are involved. That means that you're protecting yourself so that you are being paid, you know, at least the same rate as any other rights holders on that song. Now, Kerri, I noticed in the chat you said, I love libraries. And that's great because, you know, so we're talking about authenticity and then also about libraries. I would love to hear from you how that fits in. And I also want to address something else that that I saw come up in the chat, which is, you know, because this is a global music conference and we've got a lot of people here who are outside of the US who may be, you know, who are based in other countries where maybe you'll have a scene that takes place, or maybe you'll even just have a scene with a character who's from that place, and you want to know, like, okay, well, what music would that person be listening to? What do you do? Perhaps this is outside of the library thing, or maybe it includes it. What do you do to make sure that you are accurately portraying the music of the culture that's trying to be represented in a scene?
Good question. Sorry, my cat is a lot.
Your cat's great.
Thank you. She does it all the time. So basically, I started working in this business straight out of college, and my major in college was ethnomusicology. So I studied music from all over the world. It was totally my thing. And I was disappointed for years at how little music from other parts of the world came up in my daily job. But whenever it did, I would be like, oh boy, like I'm on it, you know? And I always, okay, fun fact, because everyone likes fun facts. One of the first ones that I ever dealt with, right when I started working on The Office, we had the episode where Ed Helms had to play sitar. So there was a panic where we need to find Ed Helms a sitar teacher. So I started making some phone calls and this and that. And the next day they're like, oh, Ed Helms already knows how to play sitar. It's all good. We're done. So anyway, that was one of the first times it came up. But you know, I try to be unexpected. But I try to be as authentic as possible. Honestly, the libraries are great at that. I use them a lot for world music. It's easy and it's quick. But I'd prefer to get the money directly to independent artists from those countries. You know, the library tracks get used. And there's starting to be more of it in the indie licensing world, where international artists and catalogs are getting picked up for licensing. And I now always try to go that route first whenever possible. But there's still not a ton out there. It takes more time and digging. And one thing I often don't have enough of is time. So I'm just hoping that we keep seeing the trend go where more catalogs and artists get picked up by licensing companies and independent publishers and representatives and stuff like that. So we have access to more world music. I don't even know if world music's a good term, but you know what I mean, from music from all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a fantastic trend if more, you know, Terrorbird third-party rep, Seigo at Domino on the record and publishing side, Carter on the publishing side. So Carter, over at Peer, you know, is there anything that you do or can do to help highlight those non-US based artists that you represent, and make sure that if Kerri needs something for a specific scene that she might know about, that she finds out about perhaps a corner of your catalog that might have the exact thing that she needs?
There sure is, yeah. We have offices all over the world, 36 offices in 31 countries, and a lot of relationships that help us do just that. It's very important to me, especially, it's just been a focus of my tenure here as the head of this department, to find ways to bring authentic music from all over the world. So if there are music creators out there in this audience who are creating music in Senegal or in Thailand or in Belarus, wherever you may be, I'd be interested in finding out more about your music. We get requests like, we get requests for international music quite regularly. And we also have been known to make music to fit these requests, because sometimes people need something like a country classic, but sung in Tagalog. And it may not be the easiest thing in the world to find at a library. So we'll create it. So that's my sort of long answer to say that it's something that's very important for the community, for our entire film and TV community, to have these direct connections between music makers and all over the world and the people who are creating content.
Great. So let's say one of these music supervisors is working on a project that could use music from one of those artists. Carter, you're going to license the publishing side, perhaps the master is controlled by Domino. Seigo, how do you determine whether a deal that one of these music supervisors presents to you is a good deal?
That's a good question. Of course, if the money is good, then that's a good deal.
Well, how do we know how, to give some perspective for folks here, like what are some of the factors that go into determining the fee that you might see for a use?
So depending on, how it's used. So like in the case of the TV shows or films, if it's background vocal use versus main title use or end credit use, end credit use or main title use would be more important. So that would be a little factor. We consider that as a little bit more higher fees. For the commercial and ad and stuff, like, depending on the products, depending on how much of a budget, and depends on, how long and how wide. Is it worldwide, or is it like US only, or is it somewhere else, it's a China only or some place else, or how long are they going to use? Is it 1 year or 6 years or 6 months or in perpetuity, which is forever, meaning buyout deal, right? So depends.
It also sounds like the list of potential factors going into.
Yeah, lots of things comes in, and then of course how the artist's doing, how the songs' popularities are, and then how the are they baby band songs, or are they established like a top 40 songs, or classic like Christmas song. So it's really up to lots of factors we consider that negotiating the pricing and the terms and stuff. So
Seigo,
yeah,
one of the biggest takeaways that I take from that is I hope everyone listening took in, like, even just the surface level of what Seigo is describing are some of the many, many factors that go into determining the value of a piece of music's use in a project, and how valuable the knowledge of someone like Seigo is, and perhaps then why it's so important. You can still be an independent artist and still work with one of these companies. And it seems like there's so much to be gained by having this representation, by having the expertise of someone like Seigo who knows what you're supposed to be paid for things, to have someone like Carter who's been on both sides of things and who understands exactly what music supervisors are listening for when they ask for something, and will know where in his catalog to go find it. For Barry and Blake and Kerri, I wonder, perhaps in the chat, would y'all be up for either unmute yourselves or type, what are some places that particularly this like global music audience could be hitting up for representation? Or is there a source that you're like, go to this place, it has a list of folks? Like where should these people be looking for representation is the question. Who do you like to hear from or who do you like to go to when you're looking for the type of music that they make?
I like everybody. So for me, the thing that I'm always telling people is that direct pitching of your music to projects that you really see your music being in is the best way to start an organic conversation. As I said, every project is different, so it starts with a blank slate. And I'm a DJ, so I love to go to my crates, but I also love to listen to Radio Nova from Paris. There's so many different sources of music and ways to keep up. But now that the internet has come out, and I can, everyone on the panel has been doing this since before the internet, which is also very interesting because now the explosion of access has in some ways made finding a great song a little less adventurous, let's say. Now it really has become a lot more business oriented in terms of when Seigo was talking about MFN. For me as a supervisor, the best way for me to clear music efficiently is to be as transparent as possible. I have to say, I've got 12 songs and I've got $60,000. And this is why I'm offering you this much. And everybody else is getting that much as well. Because for me, if I'm withholding any of that information, I risk having the conversation fall out of the ballpark for what we're ready for budgetarily. But back to the question, I'm kind of agnostic in terms of sources. You know, we have colleagues, we have people who represent music, but I'm always just as excited about independent artists and resources as well.
So let's go to that then. So Barry, if you were to receive an email from a musician who's an audience member here, what would that email contain that would make you be like, ooh, like this is something to keep in mind, I'm going to save this email? And by contrast, is there anything that they could say that would make you be like, you know what, and just delete the email?
Well, the thing that is kind of my pet peeve is, here's my catalog, listen to it. I'm going to schedule a call with you next week so you can tell me what you think about it. I don't usually.
A little presumptive.
That's a big email, and I do get a lot of them, and that's why, you know, I tell people to pitch specifically. If email comes in for a project that I'm working on, I'm going to open it, and the thing that's going to make me take notice is if the rights holder or agent is speaking my language. And most of that language goes towards the business side, which is being able to represent that all of the rights, which are the master use rights, which belong to the actual physical recording, and the publishing rights that go to the songwriters, are all represented and available at a price that I can pay. You know, so there's a term called one-stop, and that's why music libraries are so much of a great resource, because when you go to a library, you make one call, you choose that song, and you pay for it once. You don't pay a separate label and publisher. So that ease of convenience has actually opened up a lot of opportunities for independent artists who are able to treat each song like a small business. Whether you own it 100% or whether you co-own it with different people, being able to pivot and negotiate and do a transaction with that song on a dime is really what's going to make you become a resource to a music supervisor.
Kerri, I noticed you unmute yourself and then mute yourself again, possibly during the topic of pet peeves. Were you going to add something?
Yeah, I've also been getting a lot of emails with the, here's my catalog, listen to it, tell me what you think. And honestly, it's stressful. It's like, oh gosh, it's another job I'm getting asked. So those don't go over well in the business. I don't think with anybody. The way I pay attention, if it's a random email coming to me and it's not from a trusted company or pitch person that I usually use, I read them all. I don't respond to them all. I'll respond if it's well thought out, if it doesn't feel like a form letter, and if they really think like, hey, I watch AP Bio, I know you use punk music and vintage country, and I think you could be interested in this. I mean, more often than that, I get emails like, here's this hot pop song that's going to be great in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And it's like, well, I know you haven't watched or haven't done any research because I haven't used music like that ever. So I think that's what could really stand you apart, is do your research, know what you're talking about if you're going to reach out directly. If I can't respond to everybody, but I will respond if it makes sense and it's well thought out.
I'll just jump in there really quickly just to sort of point out that that's why it's important to have a relationship with a publisher like me or Seigo, or to have even like a sync pitching company like Zinc Music or something like that. Because when you're a music supervisor or an executive at a studio or a network, you get a lot of incoming, and you want to pay attention to every chick that squawks from the nest, but you can't. It's just not feasible. And the other thing is, you want somebody who knows what the shows are. So we watch, we know what these shows are. We get Kerri's pitches, or briefs, and we know what to offer her. And Kerri has certainly received, and I'm sorry to keep picking on you, buddy, but you've certainly received just general pitches from me or from Allison, just like, oh, I know this season is starting up. So here's some stuff. And I bet it's not like, I bet you're not looking at that like, why would you send me this? It all makes sense when you see it because we know what it is and we're not wasting anybody's time. And any of the music supervisors here will certainly tell you that they get, they form relationships with people who are presenting songs to them. There's a level of trust. And you will go back to the same places that keep giving you the things that you're able to place, because they're in the sales business too. The music supervisors, they've got to sell these tracks to the creatives on the show or in the film. It's not like you just decide as a music supervisor, boom, that's going in and I don't want to hear anything about it. No, you got to sell this to the creatives. And if you can make the music supervisor look good because they come up with the goods every time, they're coming back to you and they're going to listen to you when you have a recommendation. So that's why it's important to get yourself lined up with somebody other than like Taxi or a PRO or somebody who's just out there kind of vaguely collecting your money.
Yeah, everything that you just said is all good advice. And I'm not a good person to speak to this stuff because since the very first season of music supervising that I did, which was on season 1 of The Wire, I have not ever used a placement from a pitch. So in 120 hours of putting music into TV shows, have never put a piece of music in that I received as a cold pitch. There are artists, like when we were working in New Orleans for 4 years, there were artists we developed relationships with because they were known in the community and they were part of that scene. But the question that we're always asking, and it is unusual, we're often a strange niche of this world. David Simon, the thing that he wants first and foremost is, what would the people in this real world situation be listening to? And that's the thing he cares about. So we're always coming from the other end. We're like, okay, we're in a bar in New Orleans and it's 2007, what are they listening to? So it's sort of not, it's very hard to pitch to our shows and have it mean anything. Having said that, I do get a gazillion emails and I pretty much delete them all. Every once in a while I open them and it amazes me that people don't do the homework. So I'll get pitches for a show that I worked on 3 years ago and people will say, I love your work. This such and such is such a great show and I love what you do there. Please listen to my song, it's perfect. So, it's stuff like that. I mean, just do the homework, The best advice I can say for artists is figure out something that you do well, do it, make good music, join a PRO, learn how this stuff works. And then if you are going to go out and try and sell your music to people, just do your homework and know what you're talking about. Because the second you see any insincerity or lies in a pitch, you're just like, delete, spam, So, and it's surprising how much of that there is. But I guess that's also part of the, we're in an era where it is easy to send out 1,000 emails. You buy a list of music supervisors and you just write an email and send it to all of them. But I can't imagine that that's very effective for anyone.
No, I actually really like how that can kind of complete the circle of authenticity, that the people reaching out to you need to be just as authentic in their communication with you as they are in their music. So that's cool. Something that I'm seeing in the chat is people are asking about instrumentals and stems. As far as, is there anyone who doesn't think that instrumentals are a really helpful thing?
We always send them, we always have them in our hip pocket because if you got to cut a song into a picture, you need to have as much leeway as you can.
Absolutely. And, we've got primarily film and TV people here, but for ads, they're constantly looking for instrumental music. There's a lot of via voiceover happening and you've got 30 seconds to get a message across. And so often that music is instrumental, or maybe it has some lyricless vocals in it. But yeah, that's where instrumentals definitely come into play. Someone also asked about stems. I think in particular, advertising is another area where like stems can be really useful, because it might be like, can you just turn that hi-hat down and then this will work great. So we have 7 minutes left and about 8 hours worth of discussion that we could continue having. We've gotten a lot of really amazing questions that I'm attempting to whittle down right now. The biggest question that people seem to want to know is about representation. And I do feel like we kind of covered that. I would encourage audience members to go through this chat here because Barry actually somewhere in here wrote some good information that I'm not good enough at scrolling to find. Barry, do you remember what it was that you were saying that I'm probably praising?
Folks were asking how they get information to pitch directly to shows.
Yes.
And I was saying that the trades, Hollywood Reporter, Variety, you know, Backstage. I've actually started reading Backstage more because I've realized that casting calls are an early indicator that a show is about to get on the road. So what you're really trying to do is realize that by the time you see a commercial for a show, it's too late. You know, most likely they're pretty much settled in. So it's always great being able to get at the development stage or at the pre-production stage to really connect with the people and see what their needs are and if there's something you can do to help them.
That's such a great point about, you know, as soon as you see like if you see a promo for a Netflix show, that means that the entire thing is already done. You know, it's a little late to try to get in there. I know that
I shall point out that the marketing is often behind production, and I've had plenty of movies where we're finishing up the trailer, but that movie's not done, and we still have holes to fill. So I wouldn't count it out completely, but it's definitely true that you want to be on the far front end of these things, reading the trades like Barry suggests.
Amazing, and I would like to give a special Q&A moment to the presenters and promoters in the audience. Shout out to Diane from Global Fest Wavelengths, who mentioned to me that many people in the audience are presenters and promoters, and that many of you have questions about how publishing relates to you. So as a present to you, I would like to ask Seigo to please explain for those members of the audience, when does because you know, live shows aren't happening right now, they're streaming. Where do promoters of festivals and shows that are having to do streaming content, what clearance do they need from you and when? And when do they not need clearance from you?
If it's a live streaming, I think either venue, in this case, you know, if it's some website or YouTube or somebody else, has to have some license, blanket license with a PRO, ASCAP, BMI, or some sort of, you know, similar organizations. Usually they should be able to provide some sort of blanket agreements. I don't know the detail and I cannot get into too much detail, but that's should cover the performance of the live streaming. But if you want to keep that streaming for, you know, a couple of months or a year or like, you know, 60 days, then the sync rights comes in because it's a recorded synchronized use of the music. So in those cases, you need to clear the sync rights, sync clearance with the publishers. And sometimes you need to clear with the master rights as well, because depending on how the artists have the exclusive agreement, recording agreement with the label. So you might need to clear both sides if you go into that route. And
so generally speaking, then, if I understand you correctly, if someone is putting on a show and streaming it live, they're good to go because essentially they're going to be covered by the PROs who they already have deals with. But if they want to archive that show in some way, right, and make it available for viewers to enjoy at a later time, that's where they'll need to have additional direct clearance with someone like you?
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, great. Now we all know how that works. Let's see, Diane, are there any last questions or things that have not been covered here that you wish were?
No, you guys are crushing it. Thank you. You have a room of very grateful folks.
Hey. Does anyone have any, oh, something that I really like to ask people is, if I can do one last go down the row question, since we do have a couple minutes. In brief, is there something in your career that you wish you learned sooner that you can share with everyone? I'll give an example. I wish that I learned sooner to never pretend that I know something that I don't, and to just always say, "What's that?" instead of trying to look cool and knowing what someone's talking about.
I wish that I learned sooner as a music supervisor that by undertaking a most favored nation structure on a project, it has its positives, but it also has its cons. If one song wants more money, that means every song wants more money. And the dialogue between the producers, the directors, myself, the other artists, it really puts the supervisor kind of in a tightrope situation. So one thing that allowed me to evolve my business offerings and my service offerings into strategy is being able to know that I need to have a real conversation and know who the people are that I'm working with, to find out whether or not, if push comes to shove, are they going to be willing to lose a song, or is that increased fee going to create a domino effect that's going to blow our budget out?
So real conversations, perhaps the telephone is underrated. Anyone else have a nugget of wisdom before we have to move on to the next panel?
Yeah, I think one thing that I learned, I've done a lot of network TV shows, and I was always a bit scared to push what type of music, and just to get a little weirder, because I was, and at the time, I think with NBC, I had to be careful of that. And when I worked on Master of None with my friend Zach, who had never been a music supervisor, and he's a DJ, he had completely new and fresh ideas about, we can push boundaries and we could get into some weird stuff, but we have to track it down, which is a lot also in a whole other story. But I think that opened my eyes and made me more comfortable in the shows that I also do on my own moving forward, of just thinking more outside the box, not just always going to the major labels and just digging deeper into the record collections and into things that you love. So I wish I did that earlier, but I also think with the platforms and kind of expanding just how deep TV is getting, I think it's also the timing of it all. And I think we're all doing a bit more of that now. And I'm really grateful for the shows that have really started pushing the limits, because I think it's opened up a lot of new music and artists and catalogs and people getting paid that never had before.
Absolutely. Also a perfect full circle moment there. Y'all, thank you so much for being a part of this and sharing your wisdom with everyone attending.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, audience.
Absolutely. Stick around for the fireside chat with the NPR folks, everyone.
Really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you to our panelists. What a phenomenal conversation. And I think something that must become a staple in this Global Fest universe. It's so informative for many of us. And Lauren, you did a great job extracting the best from our panelists. So thank you for that. I know 5 panelists isn't easy, but you were incredible, graceful, and we learned so much.